Welcome to my show. A guest here. His name is Ben Eden. Mr. Ben, how are you doing, sir?
I'm great. Thanks for having me today.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Ben. Firstly, you are a motivational speaker. You are also a coach and an author. Can you please, sir, discuss more about yourself and how you're doing currently now, sir?
Absolutely. Yeah, for my journey through college was actually to go into human resources. So I did my bachelor's and my master's degree in human resources, and I actually became an executive of a company in my 20s. And I helped grow that company to become international. And that was a good experience. But for a number of reasons, and we might get into some of that story today, I ended up leaving that job in February of 2020, right before the pandemic, because I had discovered that not only in my personal journey, that even though I had seemed very successful, I was suffering in silence for many reasons. And I discovered that I wasn't the only one. I mean, a lot of professionals suffer in silence and feel like they can't tell anybody. So I left the executive role to become a speaker. And, with COVID, I had to speak a lot virtually. But when I shared my full story, a lot of people said, Ben, I resonate and I need your help. I think you can help me. And that's where I started coaching. And then after 4 years of coaching, I had this book and I just felt very strongly I have to write this book called How We See Ourselves. Because with everybody I help to get the results they want, they end up having to change the way they see themselves. And it's been a fascinating journey.
And that's why I want to go to the book you've written, sir. How we see ourselves. Can you discuss more on this book? And do you also have books that you're planning to release in the coming future, sir?
Yeah, good question. So, of course, I do have some other books in mind. My play with that is to keep pushing this current book for the time being, and then when I find the right publisher, they usually ask for a second book, and then I'll be ready. So that's the plan there. But yeah, with how we see ourselves, it really describes a model that I designed. It's called the Eden model, and it talks about how most of us, especially if you're a high achiever, the person who does really well and is able to accomplish a lot, but also is very self-critical because you're like, oh man, I could have done better. Or as soon as you finish that big project, you're ready to go to the next one. That's a sign of a high achiever. And the thing that happens is, yes, we are good at getting results. And yes, we are very capable of getting good results. But what we experience is if we get the results, we feel great. We're like, yes, I feel awesome. This is working. I can keep doing what I'm doing. But what happens when we don't get the results? It's extremely frustrating. And what happens is we don't just say, okay, I'm frustrated, or okay, let me try again. And yes, sometimes we do. But ultimately, what the brain does is it goes all the way to our identity. And we start to think, well, shoot, if I can't get these results, or if this isn't working, then maybe there's something wrong with me. Maybe I'm the problem. Maybe I'm just not cut out for this. And I saw this with so many people, even though they seemed very successful. And I'll give you a quick example. I was working with a realtor a few years ago, and he shared an experience. He and I had known each other for a few years by then, and he was relatively successful. He was growing in the field and making a good name for himself. But he told me a story about how 3 years earlier, he had been given the opportunity to invest in a triplex. And at the time, he's like, oh, well, I'm a newer realtor and I've never invested in something this big. I just don't know if I'm ready for it. I'm used to the single homes or the smaller deals. That triplex, in the end, I just think it's a little too risky. So he did not invest. Now, looking back 3 years later, he says that is the biggest mistake I've made in my career so far because he now knows how successful that triplex would have been, and he knows what kind of good deal that would have been. So, of course, looking back, he has the confidence to say, oh, well, I should have done that. But the key is, if you noticed some of my language that I used, he said, "Oh, I just don't know if I'm ready for that." So he was talking about, yes, some thoughts and beliefs, but ultimately, He was describing how he saw himself. He was thinking, well, I don't know if I'm that type of investor. I don't know if I'm at that level of investing in triplexes. That's a different level, different risk. But if instead, and this is what I teach in the book, if instead of thinking, oh, that's risky, I do want the result, I do want the money, but I just don't know if I can, you first start with identity and say, I am a successful realtor. I make smart business decisions. I can see the opportunities and I take the right opportunities for investing in these properties. So when an opportunity like a triplex comes up, then hey, you're in a place to make a smart decision. And if the decision is right, then you say, great, let's do it. And then it moves up the chain so you actually get the result that you're hoping for. So it's fascinating what we do as high achievers. We're all looking for results. But if we don't understand this model, then we are dependent upon the results. In other words, if you get them, hey, I'm going to school, I got my degree, cool, now I feel great, I'm a graduate. But if you go to school and you're struggling and you end up changing majors and you decide, I just can't finish college, then you start to think, oh, who am I? Maybe I'm just a college dropout. And we start to call ourselves by different titles, by different names. But the key, and this is another one of the main points of the book, is it's called the model for lasting results and fulfillment. So we do chase results, and that's normal. But if we don't do it the right way, they're not lasting. Okay, we got the sale. Okay, we got the deal. Okay, sure, that happened. But then 6 months later, it's like, oh, how come I can't do that again? Or how come it isn't happening? So this model helps establish lasting results that will last for a long, long time. Why? Because you have established who you are. And when you establish who you are, then you are in a place to be ready to receive those results instead of constantly chasing those results.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ben. And firstly, self-perception is a really, really, huge topic. How do you personally define self-perception, and why do you think it is important, sir?
Great question. So self-perception is another term for identity. So in the past, my past answer, you heard me say identity. So it's the same idea as self-perception. In other words, it's how do you describe yourself? How do you see yourself? If you were to tell somebody about you, or if you had a bio, what would it say? And that describes you. Now, sometimes it isn't super clear how we see ourselves, what our self-perception is, but it is made manifest in the behaviors we do, which are driven by the emotions we feel, and emotions are influenced by the thoughts that we have. So ultimately, going back to this realtor story, if he perceives himself as just a beginner realtor, then guess what? He's going to get those results because that's the mathematical equation. Wow, I'm a beginner, I'm going to get beginner results. But if he can change his self-perception and say, wow, even though I may not have these results today, I can see myself as having them, as a person who is capable and successful enough to have those type of results. So that will make it so he believes it's possible, how he thinks that it's possible, how he feels it's possible. I'm going through the model, even though you can't see it, but you'll get a copy of this. And then you start to do the things that make your results come to you. So the difference for all success truly comes down to self-perception. Even if you hear somebody like Tony Robbins, I mean, he may not use that term, but he does talk about
Mm,
identity. If you're running into the same problems over and over and over and you feel stuck, or if you want to achieve the next level of growth in your business, in your career, in your life, in your happiness, relationships, health, whatever it is, it always comes down to a new identity. You have to change the way you see yourself so that you can get that result. Otherwise, I'm just being a little redundant here, but otherwise, you get the same result because you're seeing yourself as the same person.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ben. And how how do you think someone can identify whether their self-perception is helping or is hindering their growth? How can someone tell, sir?
That's a great question. So how can their self-perception, how can they tell if their self-perception is helping or hindering, right? Getting the
Mm,
results. So let me give a perspective of a coach, and then maybe I can give a tool for people who are listening.
Hmm.
When I work with somebody, now obviously they don't come to me and say, "Oh, Ben, it's because of how I see myself, and I need you to help me change how I see myself and everything else." I mean, that's not super clear to them. But how I know as a coach is when I listen to what they talk about and what they say. And when they say things like, I'd love to have this many more customers come through my door, but it's just too hard, or I just can't make it happen. I can hear some of their emotions. They feel like it's not possible. Okay. And then the language they use is saying, I just don't know if it's possible, right? So those things are signs to me that the way they see themselves is not the way somebody who has those results would see themselves. So to answer that question, for somebody else to know if it's helping or hindering, I would journal, because journaling, writing it out, is a way to see your thoughts. So when you have a coach, you're talking out loud, and the coach can see that from a third party perspective and point out things that are obvious to them, but may not be obvious to us because they're our thoughts, right? We're used to having them in our head. So the key is to get those thoughts out of our head, and then we can observe them. And if we start to journal, and you can do it in many ways. You can get onto a Google Doc, or even there's a lot of audio versions, and you can just talk, right? And then you listen to it or you read it, and then decide how you feel about that. If you're like, what? This person is pretty much saying it's not possible, or this person obviously doesn't believe in themselves, or this person just feels so discouraged, that is a sign that their current self perception is not aligning with the results they want. In other words, it is currently hindering their results. Okay. And if that's the case, then yeah, a good solution would be to get a good coach who can help you through. Because guess what? Even coaches like myself, I have a coach, because we all have these thoughts and it's a muscle. We have to learn the technique. We have to challenge the old thoughts so that we can make room for the new. And we have to strengthen the new thoughts so they become habits. And then that changes our behaviors and so on. So that is a way to know if your self-perception is hindering or helping, is by observing your thoughts.
Observing your thoughts. Thank you so much, Mr. Ben. And what are the biggest challenges people face when trying to change their self perception, sir?
Great question. Most people fall into two, well, there's elements of the model. So everybody's chasing results. And if we keep our focus just on the results, then that becomes the biggest challenge, because it's a black and white situation. Either I have it or I don't. If I have the results, oh cool, this must be working. If I don't, oh, it must not be working. So there's a huge challenge. But here's something else that's super important. And it's one of the biggest differences that I learned in how to make this difference. Because some people, they just focus on, oh, positive thinking and make your goal clear and it'll all happen and everything else. And yes, that's important. But what happens that a lot of people don't talk about is the emotions that we experience. Because we might think, okay, I get it. I want the results. So I'm going to do these behaviors, right? I'm going to try hard. I'm going to invest. I'm going to spend more time. I'm going to get a partner. I'm going to do whatever, those behaviors. But again, when they don't work, we experience emotions. Or even as we try these behaviors, we experience emotions like, "Ooh, is this going to work?" And I feel a little bit of anxiety. Or, "Oh, it is working. And I feel a little bit of excitement, but I don't want to be too excited, because if I get too excited and it doesn't work, then I might be disappointed. And ooh, I don't want to be disappointed." Right? And so we have a whole range of emotions, of course, including fear and anger and frustration. And then we think, well, on my quest to obtain my results, I don't know what to do about these emotions. I don't want to deal with these emotions, and I certainly don't want to tell anybody about my emotions. So I just force them down and I pretend they don't exist. And that causes us to isolate. It causes us not to relate with people anymore. It causes us not to reach out to people anymore. And that becomes a huge challenge and barrier to your success, because then your brain is thinking, oh, I just need some help, but I can't get it. And then I become more and more different from others. And there's no way anybody else can help me. And now somebody who still has the potential of achieving amazing things now does not believe it because they're isolated and they've convinced themselves because, oh, I still feel like it's not possible. They've convinced themselves that they are not capable.
Mm. Thank you so much, Mr. Ben. And what habits or routine can help nurture a healthier self perception, sir?
This is great. This is an aspect of what will be in my next book. So,
Okay.
one thing that is super powerful, and it's one of the most powerful things that I teach in my coaching. It's something that people would recognize from people like Napoleon Hill, who wrote Think and Grow Rich, and
Mm,
really any of the prosperity thought leaders. I call it the power statement. And what it is you imagine yourself in the future. So let's say 1 year from today. Just imagine yourself 12 months from today. And how you do this is you don't think, okay, in a year from now, I hope, or I will, or I won't. You don't talk in that language. You talk in present tense because you're imagining that 12 months from today is today. So not it is the future. You're like, no, it is today. And I'm looking back at my former self 12 months ago and I'm telling him or her the difference that I'm experiencing now. And when you can put yourself in that place and see the new Ben, see the new Timmy, and having those results, that makes all the difference. Because, as Napoleon Hill teaches, whatever the mind can conceive and believe, it can achieve. So if you can see it in its mind, conceive and seeing, okay, that's possible, and then believe it is possible, and say, yeah, I mean, I may not fully understand how to do it today, but I could see myself. Why? Because I am seeing myself. The subconscious knows what you want. And when you visualize and you meditate and whatever, you put yourself in a place to say, what does my life 12 months from today look like? And you don't judge what comes, then you start to see, wow, I do see myself as selling 1 million copies of my book. I do see myself as having so many people interested in the Eden model that I have created a certification for these people. And now people teach from the Eden model and have helped millions of people around the world. And when I see that, and as I spoke it out loud right now, I feel so much power, so much excitement. So instead of living in the now or the past and thinking and focusing on things that didn't work or that were frustrating, or focusing on the fear of trying and the disappointment of failing, and those stories that we tell ourselves, we consistently focus on the desired future because we've already been there. And when you've already been there, the brain knows it's possible. And now it says, well, we just have to create it. And if you can focus on that new person more than whatever is going on in the past or in the future or in the present, then you can become that person.
mm. Thank you so much, Mr. Ben. And lastly, what's one piece of advice you'd give to someone struggling with negative self perception, sir?
One of the biggest things for me was to reach out.
Mm,
Tony Robbins has a phrase, when you're in your head, you're dead. Because too often we believe every single thought that enters our head or that goes through our mind. We think, yeah, that must be true. Why? Because I thought it. Well, that's not the case. Not all thoughts that enter your head are yours. Okay. Once you know that truth, you can say, wait a minute, that's just a thought. I do not have to believe it. And I know that it comes from a source that I don't want any part of. In fact, it's from the devil. Okay. And I want no part of it. And when we start to reach out to others, we start to have conversations and see how they're doing, or opening up and saying, you know what, let me just be vulnerable and honest. I'm struggling with this right now. You might think my life's perfect because, hey, that's what my brain tells me that you think, right? You might think everything is going on fine. I have a picture perfect life, but here's what's truly going on. And if you can do that to a safe person and realize that that person says, wow, thank you so much for sharing that with me. And I accept you for who you are. Then maybe they share a story. It's like, yeah, I mean, business is hard, man. And going through college is hard. And starting something new is hard. And you're like, oh, it is. And it's not just hard for me. I'm not the only one who thinks it's hard. And then you start to build a connection and a relationship. And that tells your brain that you are not alone in what you're experiencing. It tells you that you are not the problem, that there's not something broken about you. And that starts to rebuild your sense of identity. Because sometimes we do think we're broken because we don't think we're enough. But when we talk to somebody else and we can open up, we know that some of the greatest joys come from connecting with others. The quality of our relationships is the quality of our lives. Why? Because it affects our emotions so much. And if we can feel good about ourselves, then we feel good about life. And we can help others feel good about themselves as well. So, again, my biggest advice for somebody struggling with a negative self perception is truly find somebody to reach out to. And it's not just for a complaint session. It's not to say, oh, look at me, woe is me. It's just to say, wow, who could I talk to? Who could I relate with? That was part of my story. I had the quote unquote picture perfect life. Everything seemed like what everybody wants in their life, traveling the world, being an executive, having nice things. But I had turned to things like addiction to try to feel better because I thought there was no other option. And when I finally started to reach out to friends and family members and just say, look, here's my true story. Here's what I've been going through. They didn't judge me. They didn't say, I thought you were perfect and now I can't even talk to you anymore. No, it was now I had an even deeper and better connection with these people. I no longer felt lonely. I no longer had to struggle with an addictive behavior alone, but I was able to get rid of all those negative behaviors because I knew that I was accepted. And that strengthened my self-confidence. My self-perception became stronger. And now I am in a place to be able to help others do the same.
That's very, very, very inspiring, Mr. Ben. I'm so glad for this. Thank you so much, sir. And lastly, there's a question I normally ask, sir. From the ancestors, from the forefathers, there are a lot of things that do exist during our ancestral time that isn't existing in our time today. If there is anyone or anything you would like to bring back to our time today, what do you think that thing would be, sir?
I just think of the pioneers that crossed the United States, right? They had to travel thousands of miles
Mm,
through all sorts of weather, some including snow. They had frostbite. They had to leave all their possessions and again travel these thousands of miles to somewhere they'd never been. But even though they went through some extremely trying physical trials, they came out of it some of the strongest mentally. And I believe a big part of it was because they had that connection. They actually talked to each other. They looked at each other in the eyes. They didn't have cell phones where they just looked at the phone and they communicated through text, even though you're sitting right next to each other, right? They didn't have the social media that says, oh man, I have to compare myself to the other pioneer 2 miles away. No, they knew what was important, which was their family, and they connected to each other. They had strong relationships. And again, I'm not saying social media and cell phones are bad by any means, but if we could have that sense of genuine connection with a fellow human being that doesn't need to see you as perfect, but can see you for your strengths and your places of need for help, and that causes for a happy life.
Mr. Ben, I sincerely want to thank you for the time for the discussion on the um on the self perception. Thank you so much, sir.
It was my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right, sir. Have a wonderful day, Mr. Ben.